Hi, this is Daniel Hutchins, and today we're going to be doing an article from our friends Screen Rant. So today from Screen Rant, we're going to be talking about the X-Men. Okay, so the MCU best X-Men villain is one that Fox had tried, but didn't use. Okay, so this is very interesting indeed. So of course, the MCU's first X-Men villain could be Nathaniel Essex, also known as Mr. Sinister, who was teased various times by Fox's franchise but has never appeared. Now this was published 8 hours ago. It's hot off the truck today, so keep that in mind, guys. So the MCU's best choice of the X-Men's first villain was already teased various times by Fox. But now that Disney owns the rights to all of Fox's properties, the MCU can utilize some of these elements from Fantastic Four and all mutant-related titles. This is the ideal opportunity to take a different approach to the Fox's X-Men franchise and introduce individual characters before assembling an official lineup in the MCU X-Men movie. But this main villain for this highly anticipated cinematic universe would have to be a Fox franchise. Foreshadowed, but never got the opportunity to directly feature Nathaniel Essex, also known as Mr. Sinister. Now, okay guys, so here's a little bit of history, okay? So Mr. Sinister has quite an intricate comic book history since his 1987 full debut, having been powered by Apocalypse, resurrected multiple times through the use of clones, and having interacted with the time-traveling Cyclops and Jean Grey many years before they were even born. Now, Nathaniel Essex was originally a Victorian-era scientist obsessed with the theory of evolution and genetic mutations. He predicted and studied the rise of mutant kind before investigating the potential of young versions of the prominent mutants such as Magneto, Wolverine, Juggernaut, Colossus, and Magic. Okay, so related to this article is why X-Men's mutants will work in the MCU when Inhumans didn't. Now that might be an article I might talk about next. You don't know yet, so just keep listening. Okay, so Fox X-Men franchise first teased the existence of Mr. Sinister in the post-credit scenes of X-Men Dark Phoenix, where Wolverine's blood was collected and secured in the X-Corp Corp briefcase, which was originally supposed to play an important role from Logan. In Deadpool 2, it was revealed that Russell Collins and Domino were tortured in the Essex house for mutant rehabilitation, while Dr. Reyes worked at the Essex Corporation in The New Mutants. Nathan Essex himself, however, never appeared on screen, besides the novelty of having a major X-Men villain appearing in a live-action film for the first time. Now, Mr. Sinister's introduction to the MCU would provide a familiar point of view for the audience who, like him, witnesses the arrival of mutants to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In fact, he could come with a solid scientific explanation for why they are only beginning to appear just now, and how their mutations could be possible. Okay, so then there's more, guys, so don't worry. Mr. Sinister's encounters with major characters throughout the years could give him some valuable backstories. For instance, Nathaniel Essex's presence in the 19th and 20th centuries could help explore the traumatic childhood of Magneto and Wolverine, so their next appearances have more time to focus on new events rather than their already known origin story. Pre-series, but now with Mr. Sinister, could also underline the importance of the mutant genes in the past to develop the MCU's mutant history, without the need for entire movies to be set up. After all, one of the biggest questions surrounding the MCU's mutants is how future titles can explain their absence. Like many MCU villains, Nathaniel Essex is a non-mutant who acquires his powers through artificial means. The MCU would likely simplify his origin story to avoid apocalypse and time travel. However, with Mr. Sinister would be a bridge between classic MCU and Ages of Mutants. This allows popular X-Men antagonists like Magneto, Oliver Trask, and Dark Phoenix to take a breather before playing bigger roles from the future X-Men movies within the MCU. Okay, so that's just a little bit of some ideas as far as going with Mr. Sinister for future X-Men movies. Now, about if I was going to do that other article, yes, I'm going to do it. So, why X-Men's mutants will work in MCU when Inhumans didn't? Okay, so this was also related to this information, of course, but it's a different topic entirely. Okay, so this was from earlier this year, March 4th, 2021. This is why X-Men's mutants will work in MCUs when Inhumans didn't. Okay, so although the Inhumans arrived first, the X-Men have always had higher chances to properly adapt to the MCU than Black Bolt and his family. Now this is why this is, okay? So contrary to the failed introduction of Marvel Inhumans, the successful arrival of mutants and the X-Men to the MCU is almost certain. But one of the most anticipated additions to the Phase 4 of the MCU, besides the Fantastic Four and the multiverse, was the X-Men. But for many years, Marvel Studios didn't have the rights to the famous super mutants, which kept them from appearing or being directly referenced to MCU. This is why Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch were initially called miracles, and nobody in MCU ever considered the possibilities of naturally enhanced individuals. Thankfully for all that, it's been changed with Disney's acquisition from Fox, which lets the House of Mouse adapt iconic storylines like House of M. And if fan predictions were right, mutants can appear just as fast. Okay, so back when such a concept was only just wishful thinking, Marvel Studios tried to introduce the Inhumans. The Inhumans have very similarities to mutants, but as they often keep their existence a secret from regular humans, and each of them possess unique powers. Okay, unique powers. But Inhumans and their connection to the Terrigen Mist was set up in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Okay, so before being officially introduced in 2018's incarnation of the Inhumans, which started as a feature film project but ended in a TV show, unfortunately the show ended with only just one season, never to be referenced again. Related to this article is Billy and Tommy's powers bring X-Men logic to the MCU without mutants. Now this could probably be another topic that might be talked about in the future. Of course, I'm probably going to have to take a special note at the end of this video, but yeah, this could be a potential idea for later down the road if you guys want to know more about mutants. Okay, so anyway, back to what we're saying. Although the Inhumans were doomed from the start, they still have very little chances to take center stage from the MCU. And here's why. Because before the premiere of their show, there was little to no anticipation around the introductions. The very, very few details hinted at their own existence within MCU. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. gave them plenty of relevance, but the show's lack of interconnectivity with the rest of the MCU also suggests that the Inhumans weren't going to be key players, such as most of the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. could easily be replaced or ignored despite their apparent place in the canon. Now, Marvel's decision to turn the Inhumans movie into a TV show with little marketing also could be a telltale sign that these characters were never going to be appreciated or to share the screen with Avengers, and the actual show showed no attempt to revolutionize anything to the MCU in any meaningful way. Okay, so on the contrary, the fans' anticipation isn't the only favor into X-Men. Now, the introduction of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver in Age of Ultron set up the existence of mutants back when their introduction wasn't certain, but Marvel always had so much faith in them that Iron Man's alternate post-credit scene had Nick Fury mentioning assorted mutants. Of course, this scene wouldn't have seen the light of day, because there was also included the mention of radioactive bug bites back when Sony was still considering Spider-Man 4. But this intention was still there, before the Avengers. Now it would be difficult for the MCU not to introduce mutants. Okay, so everything has fallen so perfectly into place, with Scarlet Witch possibly the first of them, and Multiverse offering possibilities of adopting some mutants from Fox's X-Men universe. Starting with the fact with Deadpool and possibly Evan Peters' Quicksilver. Other MCU releases would include Spider-Man No Way Home and Captain Marvel 2, also offering different opportunities to introduce various mutants before an eventual team-up film. Now, we don't know when this eventual team-up film will be, but it'll be sometime, hopefully in the next 10 years. Okay? So, in short, a combination of narrative precision, patience, and luck has always benefited the X-Men, whereas from the Inhumans, it simply doesn't count, with the same advantage. Hopefully, the MCU will eventually integrate Black Bolt and his family properly after mutants are a common occurrence. But that is yet to be determined, as if we are going to have that as an occurrence. Okay, so this next article says MCU's X-Men don't need their comic book history to be relevant. Now, since we're just on a roll right now, we're just gonna do an X-Men themed video. So, okay. So, MCU's X-Men doesn't need their comic book history to be relevant. Okay. So this was also earlier this year, back in February. Okay. So Disney had a difficult task ahead, introducing the X-Men to MCU. But the mutants' backstory doesn't need to copy the comics to stay relevant. And here's why, folks. Here's why. So Disney has a challenging task ahead as they incorporate the X-Men in MCU. But Marvel mutants don't necessarily need to keep their comic book backstory to stay relevant. Okay? So after Disney's acquisition with Fox, fans have speculated extensively on how the beloved characters of X-Men can enter MCU. That's already well been established. Of course, but many of those theories tie into X-Men's extensive comic history. But Disney doesn't necessarily need to embrace all these old details for the mutants to stay relevant. Okay? So this is kind of like why we have to be so creative, keep in mind. We have to be creative about what we're doing with our X-Men characters for the Marvel Cinematic Universe to be even more interesting in the future. Okay, so anyway, in the wake of Infinity Saga's conclusion, Marvel has hesitated to confirm a new big picture story arcs for Phase 4 and beyond. Okay, so Thanos' defeat and Tony Stark's death mark a culmination of many franchises' core plotlines. But so far, no major MCU Phase 4 villain or overarching narrative has been revealed yet because it's too soon. But some fans believe the introduction of the X-Men and mutants at large would be perfect next step for MCU. Oh, yeah, right, yes. But as it would bring a slew of potential stories into the mix, with new characters and with thematic depths, there are numbers of ways X-Men could enter the MCU, many of which can involve the multiverse of these characters that's become increasingly pivotal from the franchise through films like Avengers Endgame, Spider-Man Far From Home, and upcoming Doctor Strange Multiverse into Madness. But that would be the easiest way for Marvel Studios to introduce mutants. But it isn't the only way. It isn't the only way. Now, the extensive comic book history of X-Men is very, very big. It's a huge part of the series, but it isn't necessarily something Disney needs to keep for characters to stay relevant. Okay? Think about it. There are other ways, without having to use the ways we've already done, to kind of keep the X-Men kind of in the feel of the rest of the universe. Yeah. So X-Men comic book history and social themes explained. Okay? So you see right here, there's a picture right here of Magneto and Charles Xavier. Okay? So the X-Men were first introduced in 1963. Much of us will know that, but quickly became the dominant force of the world of superhero comics. While not explicitly intended for social allegories at first, the series came to reflect themes of bigotry, marginalization, and oppression similar to those being discussed widely from America during, they guessed it, the Civil Rights Movement of the 60s and 70s. Okay? So Charles Xavier and Magneto drew comparisons to Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. Okay? So the core storyline of human discrimination against mutants has always remained a key tenet from this series. Okay? So over the decades, X-Men have been a mirror for many other social issues likewise, such as anti-Semitism, apartheid, religious diversity, and LGBTQ rights. The X-Men's story inherent focus for marginalization, oppression between large groups has made it one of the preeminent comics from the terms of thematic complexity and cultural relevance, and the massive cast of diverse characters has opened up the door of opportunity to positive steps and representations beyond many of X-Men's contemporaries. Okay? So many of these themes made their way into X-Men films as well. But, of course, done by Fox. Okay? So, perpetuating the public perception of the franchise as thematically driven superhero stories tied to real-world social circumstances, this sheer scale of the history of X-Men can make the task of bringing them to an already established MCU tricky. However, there's so much backstory that goes into mutant-human conflicts. Okay? So which is why many believe the multiverse explanation is the only way to properly introduce them into the universe. So however, X-Men could still hold on to this thematic relevance without having to use extensive history. And it wouldn't be the first time that Marvel Studios has changed the origins of comic book favorites. Okay? Related to this article, Marvel can pick the best bits of X-Men movies to improve MCU canon. Okay? You kind of follow that, right? Right? Okay. So, how Marvel has changed MCU origin stories before. Okay. So MCU has become so dominant in superhero space, it sometimes feels like Disney versions of Marvel characters are how they've always been. Okay, so in many cases, however, this isn't the case, but numerous characters in MCU have been changed dramatically from their comic book counterparts, occasionally from the detriment, but often to the great effects of the awesomeness of the creative team of Marvel. Yes, okay. So Guardians of the Galaxy is a great example, but has introduced numerous new characters and a whole new part of this universe to the MCU, all while making significant changes to the source material. Star-Lord, Drax, Mantis, and even Thanos are all quite different from screen, but this series has still been a big hit. Which is why Guardians isn't the only part of the MCU to make major alterations to characters in history. Now Hawkeye Ant-Man, Doctor Strange, Falcon, Vision, and more were all tweaked to varying extents with Marvel Studios. And in most cases, those changes have panned out just fine. And of course, perhaps, the MCU's biggest change has come via the X-Men characters were already introduced. The MCU already has introduced X-Men characters. Now, we kind of already touched base on this, but we're going to go over it again for y'all. Okay, so in Age of Ultron, Marvel Studios brought 2 X-Men mutants to the MCU, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, which you probably already heard already, though. Okay, so the Sokovian siblings, Wanda and Pietro Maximoff, rather than incorporate any of their mutant history from the comics, Disney opted for a much more focused origin story whereby the Maximoffs gained superpowers via voluntary exposure to the Mind Stones. But the change explained by the twin ability without necessitating the retroactive incorporation of the broader mutant story. Okay, so WandaVision has expanded from this on Ultron's X-Men introduction by diving deeper into Scarlet Witch's abilities and their broader ramifications. As she becomes more central to the future of the franchise, she and Quicksilver could end up being more than the model for future X-Men introductions. The fans have previously thought. Okay, guys, we are back. So, I just had dinner. So, of course, it was pork. It was a pork with rice and peppers and onions, and it was a mix of flavors. And you see, it was all on like a platter. It was very, very good. It's like a fiesta dish. It was very, very good. So anyway, back to what I'm saying. We are picking up from where we were. So we said the future X-Men introductions of Quicksilver through the MCU. Okay, so related to this article, Evan Peters' Quicksilver timeline explained with all X-Men movie appearances. Now that could also be something I might include in this video, but just hold your hats. I'm still reading the rest of this article, okay guys? So just chill, okay? So how X-Men can enter the MCU. Okay, so by the most popular theory that's out there right now is how X-Men will enter the MCU is still a multiverse story, okay? But either making Fox's X-Men films canon in an alternate universe, creating a new universe with mutants, or both, Disney can keep all the history of the X-Men series without having to retcon any of the current MCU. However, that strategy will still bring a number of challenges with the two universes merge. Would they remain separate except for crossovers? How would Scarlet Witch fit in with more traditional mutants? There's also a possibility that select few X-Men characters could bring brought into the MCU without incorporating mutants at large, though that would undo a lot of what makes the series so compelling in the first place. Increasingly, though, Marvel has dropped hints that MCU's X-Men could be introduced in a different way. WandaVision has reiterated that among many accounts, with the Infinity Stones having the ability to cause genetic mutation and give superpowers, and it's also shown that increase in sentiment among some normal humans that superpowered individuals are dangerous to society, but of those threats, if continued, could eventually bring X-Men to MCU. Some sort of global event tied to the Scarlet Witch, the Infinity Stones, or both, could spark mutations across the world, in the groundwork being laid for bias against those with broader bigotry issues tied to those affected. Okay guys, so my phone was at 14%, so I'm repositioning my video a little bit, so don't worry, I'm still I'm still doing the stuff though. So we are 25 minutes in this video. We still have plenty of battery. We're just gonna change a little bit of the scene just to fit the mood a little better. Okay, now you see the corner catacomb of my door and my closet, where the closet meets the door. So you see, you've probably seen this many times before. So, okay, and we just point this closer. Now, bear with me, folks. I am doing a different style right now. So we talked about bigotry issues. Okay. So, however mutants were introduced to the MCU, there are plenty of ways to keep their stories socially relevant, even without the extensive history from the comics. Now, plot lines featuring global phenomena, discrimination, social movement, and marginalization were just as topical as now, as well as the X-Men first began. But the MCU doesn't need decades of in-universe anti-mutant sentiment to make these stories work. Okay, so X-Men has always operated from the idea that people fear and distrust that which they don't understand, and there are plenty of ways for the MCU to explore that idea, no matter how mutants were introduced. Okay, so we are going back up to that maybe area where I was going to talk about. Okay. Now, I'm just going to take my sweatshirt off. I actually don't mind the cold down here. I'm in the basement, so it doesn't really matter to me. Okay, so Evan Peters' Quicksilver timeline explained how X-Men movies appearances. Now, Evan Peters shockingly debuted as Quicksilver in WandaVision. Now, here's every prior appearance Peter Maximoff made from X-Men movie franchise. Okay, so Evan Peters played Quicksilver in Fox's X-Men movie franchise. We know that much. But now he's officially part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe in WandaVision. Peters was recast in the role of Pedro Maximoff from the late twin brother Wanda Maximoff Elizabeth Olsen. The MCU Quicksilver was played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, and he died in Age of Ultron. The fact was that there was a Quicksilver in X-Men movies and in the MCU. In the result of a strange distribution of Marvel character rights, Marvel's X-Men mutant characters, which included Quicksilver, who was a mutant and son of Magneto in comics, which were owned by Fox, not Disney, for years and were thus outside the MCU stable of license to draw from. But Quicksilver was also a member of the Avengers in comics. Okay, so when they started to produce their own films, which began with 2008 Iron Man, which we're not really going that far, there are some gray points and many years of negotiations, which happens to be the character of Quicksilver, who has been part of the X-Men and son of Magneto in from those comics, and also was a primary Avenger during some time. Okay, so the complete X-Men movie timeline from 2000 to Dark Phoenix. Now, that would be a very, very, very long video, so I probably might do that maybe in a few weeks. I don't know. Just let me know in the comments if you want me to do that. Okay, anyway. So this meant that while Marvel Studios could include Quicksilver in the Scarlet Witch in 2015's Age of Ultron, Fox beat Marvel to the punch by debuting their own version of Quicksilver a year before X-Men Days of Future Past. But yet the two Quicksilvers had no relation to each other besides their power, super speed, the fact that they had white hair. The MCU's Pedro Maximoff was given his powers by Mind Stone, but the X-Men Quicksilver named Peter Maximoff was a man whose father was like Magneto, played by Michael Fassbender, and he was decades older than the MCU Speedster in X-Men movies, revised timeline. However, the rights issues between Marvel and Fox became moot after Disney, Marvel Studios' parent company, purchased Fox in 2019, which now allows Fox-owned characters like X-Men and Fantastic Four to now get integrated in the MCU. Okay, so the X-Men movies actually had a further leg up from Marvel and teased Quicksilver 11 years before he made his movie, from debut in Days of Future Past. The name Maximoff, followed by the number, was on the list of known mutants seen as computer screens from 2003's X-Men 2, X-Men United. This meant that Scarlet Witch was also part of an Easter egg, although the X-Men franchise never tried to create their own version of Wanda. Okay, so regardless, once Evan Peters debuted as Quicksilver, he instantly became one of the most popular characters in X-Men movies. And Peter Maximoff was liked far more than Aaron Taylor Johnson's Pedro. Okay, so here's every appearance Evan Peters' Quicksilver was made in X-Men movies and also in WandaVision. Okay, Quicksilver in X-Men Days of Future Past. Okay, we were talking a little about that one. Okay, so Peter Maximoff's first appearance was in a section of X-Men Days of Future Past set in 1973. Okay, so Peter was recommended by Wolverine, Hugh Jackman, who had time traveled from a post-apocalyptic future where a mutant genocide was being carried out by Sentinels. Logan, Charles Xavier, James McAvoy, and Hank McCoy, Nicholas Hoult, recruited Peter and his super speed to break into a secure plastic cell beneath the Pentagon in order to free Magneto, who was imprisoned for assassinating President JFK. Although Magneto claims he tried to save JFK, he was secretly a mutant. Okay? So X-Men Days of Future Past hinted Magneto was Quicksilver's father, a result from this affair with Peter's mother, although Peter only suspected and wasn't sure Eric Linzer was his dad. Quicksilver is best remembered for the incredible scene where he used to speed to save his mutant friends from security guards shooting at him in a Pentagon kitchen, which was set to be Time in a Bottle by Jim Croce. However, Peter remained behind as X-Men and Magneto resumed the rest of the mission, and he wouldn't interact with X-Men again for another decade. Okay, so related to this article is Marvel Theory, X-Men movies are part of the MCU multiverse. Now, I don't know, I might talk about that, or I might not, I don't know. Let me know in the comments down below if you want me to do that. Okay, so Quicksilver in X-Men Apocalypse. Quicksilver returned in X-Men Apocalypse, which is set in 1983, where Peter Maximoff was still a self-described loser living in his mother's basement. But 10 years after meeting him, Peter was sure Magneto was his father. Okay, so after Magneto resurfaced in Poland, had murdered police officers who caused the death from his daughter and joined forces with Apocalypse, Oscar Isaac. And then Quicksilver ran to Poland to help, but was too late. So he rocketed to the Xavier School to find the X-Men. Okay, so Maximoff arrived at the X-Mansion, nick of time, and it was about to explode thanks to Apocalypse and his 4 horsemen. In another amazing scene set by Eurythmics, sweet dreams are made of these. Quicksilver single-handedly saved all the students in the school and rocketed each mutant to safety before the X-Mutant mansion blew up. Okay, so Quicksilver was among the X-Men captured by Colonel William Stryker, played by Josh Hellman, and imprisoned in Alkali Lake's Weapon X facility, where he confessed to Mystique, Jennifer Warnes, that Magneto was his father. Quicksilver then joined the X-Men as they broke out of Alkali Lake and traveled to Egypt, where they defeated Apocalypse to save the world. Okay, so Peter still didn't tell Magneto he was his father, but he officially joined the X-Men. Okay, so that's basically all that. Next we have Quicksilver and Dark Phoenix. Quicksilver was still one of the X-Men during the events of Dark Phoenix, set from 1992. So Peter joined the team during a space shuttle rescue mission that saw Jean Grey, Sophie Turner, bond with a cosmic force that changed her in the Dark Phoenix. Quicksilver was happy to take credit for mission success, though the young students from Xavier's school. However, as Jean became more unstable and traveled to a hometown in order to confront her estranged father, Quicksilver joined the X-Men, where they went and they tried to retrieve Jean. The conflict proved devastating and resulted in the death of Mystique. Okay, so Quicksilver's legs were injured by Jean during a melee, and he sat out the rest of the film. But he remained a teacher at Xavier's school after Professor Xavier quit and Beast took over as headmaster. Okay, related to this article is every Marvel movie that isn't part of the MCU. Now, if you guys want me to do that in a future video, let me know in the comments below. Now, keep in mind, guys, I want you guys to leave comments below, because my channel would not be as successful as it is without some of your guys' input being down below my video to kind of give me a running idea of about what material you want me to talk about. So again, very, very, very important to open your mouth and talk to me about what type of things you want me to have for my videos. Okay, enough of that now. Quicksilver and Deadpool 2. Okay, so this is very minor, but of course he still is in it. Okay, though, alright, so although Deadpool 2 is set in 2018, 26 years after Dark Phoenix, Quicksilver made a hilarious cameo alongside several of the X-Men, as Wade Wilson and Ryan Reynolds complained about how empty the X-Mansion was. He didn't see Quicksilver along with Beast, but Professor X Cyclops, played by Ty Sheridan, Storm, played by Alexandra Shipp, and Nightcrawler, Cody Schmidt-McPhee, in a room behind him, and they shut the door to keep Deadpool out. Okay, so not real much from that one. So now we have Quicksilver and WandaVision. Okay? Now this should kind of reconnect your idea about Quicksilver as a character. Okay? So WandaVision Episode 5, on a very special episode, ended with the shock and surprise of Evan Peters' Quicksilver arriving at Wanda Maximoff and Vision's door. Okay? So, with Peter's recasted role of Wanda's twin brother, Pedro, taking the place of Aaron Taylor Johnson's MC's Quicksilver. How this happened is one of Disney Plus show's many mysteries. But it's possible Peter Maximoff came from the X-Men movie timeline to breach Westview via the multiverse. But it's also notable that on a very special episode, parodies from a 1980s sitcom, and Peter's version of Pedro is similar to the 1980s version of Quicksilver seen in X-Men Apocalypse. As for whether Evan Peters' Quicksilver is here to stay in MCU, is anyone's guess. So there you go, guys. That is all I'm going to be talking about. And if you guys like this content, please hit a thumbs up. And you guys have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your evening. Bye.